welcome everybody to the Radical Anthropology group tonight. And we have tonight Tam Dean Byrne, who's a very well-known actor, TV, film, theatre actor. And when Tam, who's been participating in Radical Anthropology sessions for much of this year, when he offered, as an Indigenous Scots person, to do an anthropology of Robbie Burns, the great Indigenous Scots poet, we absolutely leapt at his offer. So this is another one in the series of anthropology of Shakespeare, the background of Euripides, and now the anthropology of Robert Burns. So over to you, Tam.
Thank you, Camilla. I do feel a bit like it's the second line of Robert Burns' poem To a Mouse. Oh, what a panic is in my breastie. Yes, especially still in awe of Jacob's The Anthropology of William Shakespeare. But I felt slightly better about it when I saw the Scotland fans who have been in London for the England-Scotland Euro football match. They congregated around the statue of William Shakespeare in Leicester Square and planted a traffic cone on his head, which is something that happens a lot in Glasgow to undermine the statues of the great and the good here, putting a traffic cone on their head. They put this one on top of William Shakespeare, and they came up with this song, Shite Rabbie Burns, you're only shite Rabbie Burns, shite Rabbie Burns. That was their description of William Shakespeare, which I thought was incredible. Taken from Guantanamera, the song by the great Juan Martí, the Cuban poet. So everything has its roots further back, and its heteroglossia and so on. The discourse of the other, particularly the Bahktinian. I'm trying to get Bahktinian in early here because that's where I was really trying to head with this. Bahktinian and Morna Finnegan's wonderful, so far what I've read, dissertation. How much they're going to come out in this, I don't know, but that's where I've been beginning. I almost feel as if this is an intro to the talk that I'll come back and do at some later stage when I've really absorbed this stuff. I'm going to really look at it from a personal point of view of my involvement with Robert Burns. We had it sort of drummed into us at school. We hated Burns because you had to stand up in front of the rest of the class and sing and or recite his poetry, and that was the last thing you wanted to do when you were young. But what really drew me to him was a much later stage. There was a festival that used to happen in Ayr, where Robert Burns came from, called the Burns and All That Festival, and they asked me to take part in that. And it's a bit like with this. I thought, what am I going to do? And I found ideas, and it sort of everything sprung on from that. I'm just going to take a moment to locate what it was like at his time. I'm setting it on a particular day, 25th of January 2009. That was Robert Burns' 250th birthday. And you might well have heard about Burns Night, which is celebrated across the world. I've never had much time for these sorts of festivals. They seem to be particularly Masonic. He was a Freemason, Robert Burns, but it was a different sort of organisation back then. The way that Burns Nights sort of became were very sort of rigid, traditional, very, very sort of male. In fact, women were barred from them for a long time in lots of Burns night festivals. But it should be really looked on, and hopefully it starts to become more so now, of more in a Bahktinian sense of a feast, and a feast full of laughter, because that's what the man himself was like. And that birthday was a very special occasion for us, because I was in a band by that time, a Burnsian band, and we played 3 gigs in one day on that. But I'm going to just go back 250 years from that day to when Robert Burns was born, and just try and put in a little bit of context what it was, what the world was like that he grew up in and lived in. He was in Ayrshire, and the village life and very small town life was the norm at the time. The cities were just really starting to develop, so like Edinburgh, so on. But it was very feudal. He was the son of a farmer, but they didn't have their own land. They were the victims of the feudal system that was in operation, and very, very poor. And there was virtually no democracy at the time. In fact, the vote, the extent of the vote had only gone to the worst of it that I came across was that in Edinburgh, which was a well-known city at the time and the home of the Scottish Enlightenment, only had 33 people who had the vote at this period in time. And Burns took part a great deal in election periods. He wrote a lot of poems about it, despite not having any chance of having the vote whatsoever. But he was put across as this heaven-taught ploughman, and it was a caricature of what he was like. He was extremely well read and well educated, given the period, but he allowed himself to be caricatured as this. It was handed down from heaven somehow, this genius ability that he had, because he was going to be able to help him sell more copies of his book. That came out in 1786, his first Kilmarnock edition, it was called. The printing press had only come to Ayr 6 years earlier, so that's how modern he was. But this birthday has, as I say, become a significant point in the calendar around the world, because he could certainly be construed and has been put across as the world's best loved poet. And this festival, as I say, that started up in Ayr, I was invited to take part in that. And at the time, I was involved in a drag double act with a wonderful musician called Nicholas Bloomfield, who sadly died last year. And we were called Binge and Racket, in homage to some of you older English members might know. It was on the television. Hinge and Bracket were widely seen on the television at the time. Well, we called ourselves Binge and Racket in homage to them. And we then presented Burns, taking it away from this a man's a man for all that, this quite rigid way that he was being presented, and opened it up by dragging it up, so that his songs that we performed had different connotations. We made him a lot more fluid than he had been considered, which I've been picking up from Bakhtin, is essential to be seeing things in not a sort of fixed form, but open to change, and a fluidity. So that one of his most body numbers, I'll come back to the body. I mean, in Scots, it almost sounds exactly the same, the body and the body. Because the sense of the body and the lower half of the body is something that Bakhtin also emphasizes, and Morna Finnegan indeed does as well. The body is vital and the beginning of everything. And his song 9" Will Please a Lady took on a different connotation when performed it in a drag style. And in that song, he takes on the personality of an elder woman of the community at the time, and it goes like this. Come read me, dame, come tell me, dame, oh dame, come tell me truly, what length o' graith, when we'll cod hame, would serve a woman duly. The carlin clue her wanton tail sae ready. I heard her sang in Annandale, 9" would please a lady. But for a country cunt like mine, in truth or no sae gentle, I'll take twa thumb bread to the 9. Now that's a sonsy pintle. Oh, lees me on, my Charlie lad, I'll ne'er forget my Charlie. Twa roaring handfuls and a dod, he nudged it in fu rarely. So we did that number, and we certainly applied the body. And this festival went on for a number of years, and I was invited back, believe it or not, each year to perform. And what I picked up on in the second year, and recruited my younger brother Russell, who's a drummer, and we'd been in a punk band together called the Dirty Reds way back in the 70s, that Robert Burns' first published poem, The Twa Dugs, when I read that poem, I thought, well, these two dogs, they seem to come across as Rabbie himself and Iggy Pop, because one of the dogs in it, its name was Caesar, and Iggy Pop, I'm sure he's become a lot more well known now. He was from Detroit City, a rock star, was big friends with David Bowie, but was renowned for stripping to the waist and diving into the audience and wearing a dog collar around his neck and having a song called I Want to Be Your Dog. And he had an album called American Caesar, and this dog was called Caesar. And it was really a Newfoundland, but I had to only change a couple of words for it to fit into being Iggy Pop. And this idea of Rabbie and Iggy as the two Dougs were something that opened up the whole sense of Burns' poetry for me. And we started to mash up Burns' verse with others like Iggy's and Bob Dylan's and many others, and found a fluidity in his verse that opened it up and opened doors to us. So I pursued this line with Russell. The poem goes, 'Twas in this place in Scotland's Isle that goes by the name of Auld Lang, upon a bonny day in June, while tearing through an afternoon, twa dogs that werena thrang at hame foregathered ance upon a time. The first I'll name, they ca' him Caesar. Keep it for his measter's voice and pleasure, his hair, his size, his mouth, his lugs. Should he was nane of Scotland's dugs, but whalp at some place far away. This is what a line I changed. For Detroit City, AA. AA stands for Ann Arbor, where Iggy came from in particular. That poem, Twa Dogs, Rabbie sets up a dialogue between twa dogs, one that was his own dog, based on his own dog, Luath, a Plumen's collie, and this Newfoundland, as I say. And in that dialogue, they discuss the rich and the poor, and how they don't want to be, as dogs, caught up in the class system that they see being played out in front of them. But the last lines in the last verse of that poem, there's a description, a line that says, "The bum clocks hummed in the summer air," and I'd never heard this expression, bum clocks. A bum clock is a flying summer beetle. And the only reference you're ever going to come across to it is in that poem. So we took that as a name, and I've wore the t-shirt that we're on stage. This is the first chance I've had to wear it for a very long time because of lockdown. I think it's got Rabbie and Iggy on the back. I don't know if you'll be able to see that. Oh, I don't know quite whether you'll be able to get. I should take it off really and show you it. It's yes, I've got the bum clocks there. No, that's actually on the shirt that I wear underneath this. There's a famous picture of the twa dogs that we stuck the heads of Rabbie and Iggy on top of. But we became the bum clocks, and carried on playing that festival. And then they were going to have a commemoration in his 250th birthday. We got asked to tour around Scotland and got funded for this. And so we began with 3 gigs in the one day on the 25th of January 2009. We played in George Square below Burnsley's statue, and we played at our political cabaret night called the Manifesto in the evening, and then played a nightclub to finish it off. But I'll come back to George Square and the Manifesto later. So yes, this Twa Dogs was looking at the class system through the eyes of the animal kingdom. And Robert often used the animal kingdom in empathy. There is the one that I quoted to a mouse, that when he turned over a mouse when he was ploughing, he felt that sorry for it, that he wrote a poem. And it has become so well known that the best laid plans of mice and men gang after gley. That's just one of the examples of how he's rung down the ages of mice and men, and he had a hugely profound effect on so many people. Abraham Lincoln was one that carried a volume of Burns with him wherever he went, and learned so much of his poetry. But we were on this kick, and we got the twa dogs, and as I said, Iggy had I want to be your dog, so I had the collar on and stripped to the waist, Iggy, like Iggy Pop, because this without me knowing it, this gave a sense of the body that Bahktinian talks about, and I had a pantomime dog costume as the bottom half of my outfit. And little did I know how Detroit City was going to come back later as well. And then the other dog appears. It goes, the t'other was a plooman's collie, a rhyming, ranting, raving rabby. We for his friend and comrade had him, and in his freaks had Luath cad him. After some dug in Heelan sang, was Auld Lang Syne, fuck knows how lang. He was a gash and faithful tyke that ever lap a shook or dyke. His honest, sonsy, bosant face, I got him friends in ilka place, just like Rabbi. Rabbi was above all a social being. He identified thoroughly with the community that he was in, whilst at the same time knowing that he had removed himself from it by becoming this poet, and becoming a bard, the bard to Ayr, the bard latterly to Scotland, that he wanted to speak and express the feelings and thoughts of his community, and took that task on board thoroughly. And the Luath that he named his dog from was from this poem Ossian. Now, Ossian at the time was a massive event, that these Gaelic poems that had been discovered and translated, and later it was found out were forgeries. They were coming at the same time, while there was this complete lack of democracy that, like I described, in Edinburgh only having 33 votes. It was the Scottish Enlightenment, and it was something that he identified with, that he, while he was still a strong part of his community, that he looked to Edinburgh and finally travelled to Edinburgh and presented himself to these figures in Edinburgh. But in Edinburgh, they also were, this part of the Enlightenment view was of it tying in, and Morna brings it up, with there was the first time there was a real sense of primitive communism, as I came to know it in my Communist Party days, and through looking at the origin of the family and Engels and so on, that the Scottish Enlightenment, they identified, it seems to me, and I know, and I'm very basic on this, and so much of this is as much a question, looking for hopeful contributions later, of the sense of hunter-gatherers. They did have a sense of that as the earliest period that was put down and looked on as the golden age. And so he had a sense of that. But he also had this sense of this Ossian, that once it was proven to be a forgery, was then, it meant that Scotland and its poetry and its verse, so much of the time, especially in England, lost credibility. And he suffered because of that, that he has never been embraced, even although there is a statue to him in London. He's never been embraced in the same way, and seen as the huge figure of poetry in England since. And I would say that has carried on to the present day. But even although it was a forgery and it was even being looked on like that, they were not willing to just give it up. They were accepting that things are fluid, and that even although the verse might have been, from what was his name, James Thompson, I think, that was responsible for it, that it was still seen of worth and value and part of Scottish literature. Anyway, into the final verses that we used in our song, and what we were doing as well, as you can hear, is the Scots dialect, and that's what Burns, his first book was called Poems Chiefly in the Scots Dialect, and this was a dialect that there wasn't anything authentic in that sense about it. It was something that Burns created, but from the discourse of the other, in that sense, that he used the words that he had learned and he combined it sometimes with English, but it was an invented language, but had a fluidity. There has been attempts in more recent times to sort of to put across that there is a Scots language, and it's not. It's a dialect form, and that's what he even called it as well. The attempts to sort of rigidify these words has not helped the cause at all. It needs to stay open and free and be open to change, just like we were changing it. And in the last verses that we did, it goes, nae doot but they were fain o other, an unca pack and thick thegither. Wi' social nose they snuffed and snauk it, whiles mice and moudy works they howk it, while scoured awa in lang excursion and worried other in diversion, till tired at last, wi' mony a farce, they sat them down upon their arse. And so began a lang digression about the lords o' the creation. This is what we used to do at the gigs. And the ladies, bump, and we would kick into our second number, which then combined Robert Burns with Iggy's song "I Want to Be Your Dog," and it opened with a poem he wrote called The Bells of Mauchline, that goes, in Mauchline there dwells 6 proper young belles, the pride of the place and its neighbourhood a'. Their carriage and dress a stranger would guess that in London or Paris they'd gotten it all. And then it describes each of the bells, finishing with but Armour, Jean Armour, she's the jewel for me of them all. And this was the woman that he married secretly, and bore 2 sets of twins of his first, several other children, and outlived them by about 40 years. And it's probably too far to describe these Bells of Mauchline as a female collective, as I've been learning about from Camilla and so on here at these meetings. But there was no doubt that they had a sense of of a female community. And he recognised that as well, because in this song, Green Grow the Rasses Though, which we also featured in that number, the chorus goes, the sweetest hours that e'er I spend are spent among the lasses, oh. And yes, he was body, he had several illegitimate children, but he had, well, I'm not going to get moral on it. This is what can happen when we've had absolutely ridiculous things in recent times, that our Macker, as was through he was our real national poet, but our Macker, Liz Lockhead, who's a good friend of mine, but she compared Robert Burns to Harvey Weinstein. I mean, and that's how ridiculous it can get when you start taking a moral high ground on these sorts of aspects of Burns's life. It's so much of it, it's in the verse it talked about, and then he has got this reputation, but I've been thinking about how it must have been in his body as well, that the physical aspects that he put towards his poetry, that and I'll come on to that about the physicality of it. But one of the early things he got involved in, he was, as I say, strong in the sense of community, but he did a dance class, and he had to do it secretly. That his father didn't like him taking part in this at all. But I think that's where maybe first he got his sense of his own body, yeah. So I was then going to look now, yes, at the other areas. Yeah, all right, I've looked at that and the body and that, but Burns and the sense of the body that I've been getting from Bakhtin, it features in an essay that I came across called Burns and Heteroglossia. Now, and by David B. Morris, and it's on Academia if you're interested. And I found this valuable and interesting, and raised a lot of aspects to it, because Bakhtin himself, as David B. Morris brings up, never had any sense, never mentions Robert Burns. I mean, he's looking around about that same sort of period, but doesn't have a much regard in that sense of the for poetry. He puts across, as Morna brings it up, that dialogue is in battle with the monologue, and Bakhtin saw poetry in essence as monologue and as of one voice. But Burns definitely challenges this. The idea of the discourse of the other is so strongly embedded in Burns that he was hugely inspired by two poets that had come through earlier times from Alan Ramsay and Robert Ferguson. Robert Ferguson died even younger than Burns. Burns only made it to 37-year-old. Robert Ferguson in Edinburgh died in Bedlam in a madhouse when he was only 24. But Burns saw him as an older brother, and he wrote in using Scots words as well, mixing Scots and English. And Burns said that when he discovered Ferguson, Ferguson was the inspiration for him to carry on, and especially to carry on with combining the Scots with the English. And Burns is full of dialogue. In Twa Dugs, it comes up. It's a dialogue between two dogs, but it is really the one voice. It is more from Burns, and it is, they do speak with the same tongue. But he was making use of those dogs in order to distance himself, because from the criticism that he was making of the powers that be at the time, because these were dangerous times that he lived in, and became more and more so. He died in 1795, and he was identifying with the American Revolution and with the French Revolution, and this was very, very dangerous position to put himself in. So he would distance himself, yes, by putting it into other voices. But in his epistles, which were as like letters to other people, that they were like we only heard one side of the dialogue that he was expressing in these letters. There's a wee quote here from him. Say I've begun to scrawl, but whether in rhyme or prose, or baith together, or some hotch-potch that's rightly neither, let time mak proof. But I shall scribble doon some blether, just clean aff loof. That blether is an old Scots word for a conversation. And they are made to be spoken aloud. They're embodied, infused. David Morris puts it across as to infuse the written with the unwritten, to reinvent the relationship within poetry between speech and writing, and even more so that he did this in song, and this is hopefully definitely an anthropological aspect of him. Where Morris locates Burns in the Bahktinian sense most fully is in his work with song. That for the last few years of his life, Robert Burns concentrated to a great extent on putting words to tunes that he feared were going to die out. These were airs that had been around for possibly hundreds of years. You know, that he wanted to help survive. That he knew that his fame would give them fresh life, and that this was one of the foremost ways in which he was operating as Scotland's bard. And he started working with George Thompson. It was his first who was putting together songbooks, and asked Burns if he would be interested, and he took it up with a huge enthusiasm. And then and Thompson asks him how much he would be expecting to be getting paid for this. And this is what Burns said in his letter on the 16th of September 1792. As to any remuneration, you may think my songs either above or below price, for they shall absolutely be the one or the other. In the honest enthusiasm with which I embark on your undertaking, to talk of money, wage, fee, hire, etc., would be downright sodomy of soul. And yet, despite that, in his last letter to Thompson, almost the very last that he wrote ere he died, just 3 years later, he says, after all my blasted independence, cursed necessity compels me to implore you for £5. Do, for God's sake, send me that sum, and that by return of post. Forgive me. Dying poet, harassed by a tailor and in fear of jail. Blushing to ask as a boon what was 100 times his own by right. The picture might wring tears from a heart of stone. But he was never very far from poverty. But had obviously then, I just think that shows, had no sense of worth of money in that way at all. He revelled in this idea of writing, putting the songs, putting words to the songs, and critics have found it incomprehensible that he would devote so much to this. But there is a film that had an enormous effect on me. I don't know. I used to have a VHS copy of it, but it's gone now. If you ever come across it, it's called The Tree of Liberty, and it's a guy called Timothy Neate, who I would say that he was a great anthropologist of Scottish culture, and the film looks at Burns's songs and in particular then locates a guy called Serge Hovey, who was the son of emigres in the United States, and he was living in Hollywood. His parents had been involved in the American film business, and he was a young musician, to the extent that Serge Hovey, that his first piano was chosen for him by George Gershwin. But he discovered Robert Burns and had such an enthusiasm for him that it then became his life's work. And in particular, what he was interested in was the way that the tunes that Burns had put words to often then were detached from them again later, so that some of the most well-known ones, like Auld Lang Syne, the third most popular song in the English language after Happy Birthday, and for He's a Good Jolly Good Fellow, Auld Lang Syne, the version that we know and that we sing at New Year, because New Year has always had a much greater importance in Scotland than Christmas. Much more reason for celebration. I'm sure Bahktinian would have agrees with that. That it's not the tune that Robert put it to. So then, as I say, Serge Hovey devoted himself to putting them back together again, and then making arrangements to the songs. And it's an absolutely wonderful film. There's a singer called Jean Redpath in it, and there's a series of albums that they put out together. And what's so hugely moving in the film is that Serge Hovey is getting iller and iller, that he's got more and more, I think it's what is it called again? It's muscular dystrophy, I think that he had, but it ended up his only means to communicate were he could go like that, or he could move his pinky. And they continued to work together despite those difficulties. And the film is incredible. And when I saw it at the Edinburgh Film Festival, I'd noticed that Timothy Neat, and I'd recognised him, and Jane Redpath, they had come into and they were sitting in the row behind me. So I was sitting, crying my eyes out at the end of this film, and I just turned round to say to Tim Neat how much I'd enjoyed it, and I looked round, and he was sitting crying his eyes out, and he was the director of the film. God knows how many times he must have seen it. But this also reflects something absolutely essential in Robert Burns, because while he was so hugely bound up in humour and laughter, he was. There was a book called The Man of Feeling, and he saw that as his most prized possession, and he was so willing to emote and to be. He was in tears so much of the time, as well, and this also takes him away from this sort of the way that Scotsmen are so often portrayed, anyway. And he also he suffered enormously from what was put down, what was looked on as sort of melancholy at the time, as you described, but it's clear that it must have been a form of like bipolar. He had such incredible highs, such lucidity, and such periods of where he could work, and that he was just completely out there, but he would crash as well. And I've looked on that was a fluidity that he completely understood as well, that things did just never trotted along for him, that things were completely and always in flux. And this was another aspect of him that we put together with there's an Iggy Pop song, the band that he was in, the Stooges, called Dirt. I'm in dirt and I don't care, I'm in dirt. And we called it, from Burns's poem Despondency, an Ode. I'll just give you a couple of lines with that. Oppressed with grief, oppressed with care, a burden mair than I can bear, has set me down and sigh. Oh, life is such a galling load, along a rough, a weary road, for wretches such as I. And then another wee bit goes, you bustling and justling, forget each grief and pain. I listless, yet restless, find every prospect vain. This was a big part that he had to deal with as he was going through his life as well. One of the few songs that we did that we didn't mash up with anybody else's was one called Daunting Me. And this is a good example of when Robert wrote from the woman's point of view, that he had a very strong sense of that. And again, that had a fluidity in it. And this is a song about a young woman who is being hassled by some old guy trying to get into her knickers, and she's having none of it. And the beginning of it goes like this. The blood red rose at Yule may blaw, the simmer lilies bloom and snaw, the frost may freeze the deepest sea, But an old man shall never daunten me, tae daunten me, and me sae young, wi' his fause heart and his flatterin' tongue. This is a thing you never shall see, for an old man shall never daunten me. And that, a version of that, along with a version of this song called The Tree of Liberty, which has a fluidity in as well, in that there's still many deny that he even wrote it, but it was good enough for Timothy Neat to call his film it, and that's good enough for me as well. The Bum Clocks have got to be releasing that as an EP on the next Burns Night in 2022. So, what time are we at? Oh God, I'm fairly waffled on it. I'm just gonna then now finish up with just the last couple of points about, go back to the 3 gigs in the one day. The manifesto, this is definitely anthropology, because I've been dealt that at the Manifesto Club we performed Robert Burns's poem Halloween. Now I asked Jerry Carruthers, who is the head of the Centre for Robert Burns Studies at the Glasgow University. I said, Jerry, he's a friend of mine. He's one of them that denies Tree of Liberty was written by Burns, but there you go. What about anthropology and Robert Burns? And Jerry said Halloween is one of the key points that definitely shows him as almost Enlightenment anthropologist, that he puts across a very broad Scots poem describing Halloween and describing what the community was getting up to in Ayr that had never been recorded by anybody else. And he put in loads of footnotes to describe what was exactly going on. He loved a footnote, apparently, Robert. And they were about the future, about ways to be able to see the future and find out particularly about who you were going to be marrying. It was so often about that. But the poem is Burns again attempting to publicise traditions that came from, that were a big part of his community, but flew in the face of the Enlightenment that was going on elsewhere. So I've managed to get some anthropology in, definitely there. And in George Square, where we performed below his statue, Robert Burns has more statues than any other non-religious figure ever, apart from Christopher Columbus and Queen Victoria. More than William Shakespeare, I'll have you know. And there's statues of Robert Burns spread across 3 continents. That's how well loved he has been. And I had notions about how to try and bring these statues together, to highlight them and to use technology so that if you went to your local Burns statue, you would hear the bum clocks playing. Well, I was really trying to get a tour of all the Burns statues around the world. Obviously, they're mainly in where Scots communities have been, in the States and Canada and Australia and New Zealand. But I was looking to we played 50 gigs across Scotland in 2009, and this was my idea to try and get us a world tour. I've not succeeded in that yet. And where I was really trying was the statue in Detroit, where Iggy Pop came from. And particularly because there's a guy in Detroit called Edward Goodwillie, who had been a Scots emigre, that in 1912 he put together a book, this one, the World Memorial of Robert Burns. And this describes a lot of the statues around the world. There are some in England. I've just opened it to Carlisle. England has few memorials of Robert Burns. Scotsmen domiciled in England are so near home and visit the native soil so often that probably they're not banded together so ardently and have not become so imbued with that spirit of seeking to honour the men who made their country famous. Anyway, but Edward Goodwillie put together that book to raise funds to get a statue in Detroit. And it took over 10 years. And they finally got one. And this book came out, Burns Day in Detroit. The statue being a history of the movement for a Burns statue in Detroit and a full account of the unveiling ceremony. And that unveiling ceremony took place on July 23rd, 1921. So 1 month and 1 day and 100 years from now. I was particularly hoping that Paisley, if Paisley had won the City of Culture Prize instead of Coventry, it might have happened because they were backing it, because Paisley statue is the best Burns statue in the world. It was made by Pomeroy, who also did the Old Bailey, you know, Scales of Justice. It's a beautiful statue. And I was looking to twin those statues, just perfect. Detroit and Paisley, but they didn't win the bid. So that has not come to pass. And I don't know now whether we can really work statues in that way. You know, given what's happened and the attitude towards statues, maybe Burnsies would be treated in the same way, particularly in somewhere like Detroit. A strongly black city. Because there are issues about Burns and slavery that just before his first published edition, the Kilmarnock edition, came out, he was that skint, destitute, but also in such difficulties in the community because he had married Jane Armour secretly, and her father was furious and was after him. So he saw his only way out was to then take up the offer of a job in Jamaica to work as what he called a poor Negro driver on a slave plantation. He'd entered into negotiations with Patrick Douglas, a member of Ayrshire's sugar plantocracy, who was looking for a bookkeeper for his slave sugar plantation at Ayrmount near Port Antonio in the northeast of Jamaica. And the publication of his first collection, poems chiefly in the Scottish dialect, was intended to raise funds for the voyage. And it's one of the poems in it is called On a Scotch Bard Gone to the West Indies. And that his first purchase from the proceeds was the 9 guinea fare across the Atlantic. It says here that Burns had considered becoming an indentured servant, as he had no money to pay for the voyage, but by paying his own way he could avoid a period of indenture in Jamaica. And he booked 3 separate voyages on ships, the Nancy, the Belle and the Roselle, However, the voyage was repeatedly postponed, and in the interim, the success of his poems continued to grow. Soon, the plough driver was able to avoid the post of Negro driver by pursuing instead literary fame as a quill driver in Enlightenment Edinburgh, that he went to very rapidly after that. And this comes from a lovely little volume, double-sided. This side is The Slave's Lament. Graham Fagan, Scottish artist, and the other Scottish artist, Douglas Gordon. It was a joint exhibition that they had at the National Gallery of Scotland. And part of it was a series of poems written for the occasion by Jackie Kay, who later than Liz Lochhead became the Macker, national poet for Scotland. Jackie Kay is an adopted, black, lesbian poet. And I'm just going to finish then with one of hers from it. That then finishes with a means to get back at William Shakespeare again as well. It's called Ground. And I also like about this, that is, I didn't really bring that up. There's a lot about, it was where a lot of darkness came up, but that inspired by Anishi Kapoor's talk and about the dark and about Dark Moon, all of these areas that Burns dwelt in a lot of that. I had great quotes from Edwin Morgan about that sort of area as well, but never mind all that now. I'll just finish with this poem. You've come from the shadow, light and dark. You've come from the depth and from the shallow. You've come from the day and from the morrow. You've come from the field and from the furrow. You've come from laughter and from sorrow. You've come to beg and you've come to borrow. You've come from the barn and from the farrow. You've come from the city and from the meadow. You've come from the lowlands and from the plateau. You've come from soirees and from the rashes, oh. You've come from the borders and from the marshes, oh. You've come from the long grasses and the fallow. You've come from the swift and the swallow. You're chiaroscuro, Cutty Sark. You're Othello. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tam. That is wonderful, amazing personal exploration of Abbey Burns. Fantastic. And where have we got anybody who'd like to come up with some questions or thoughts here at all?
Tam, could you say a little bit more about the forgeries? Just because I know that Peter Gow gave a talk in Edinburgh, a brilliant talk, which I don't know whether it ever got published. So after Peter Gow came over from South America, because various things over there meant that he couldn't continue his fieldwork, he got interested in Scottish sort of indigenous law, and he just gave this talk, which absolutely fascinated me. But he had a very similar position to yours, which was that there clearly was a forgery, but kind of so what, because it was brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah, well, let me see. Because this was just one of the areas that I was discovering. I mean, I'd heard of Shane, but it was one of those areas where I felt, and I still do feel in many ways, I should have stuck to Bahktinian and Morna, but I went off on one on...
Sorry, Tam. Sorry, I shouldn't ask questions.
No. I'm just trying to find where my notes were on it as well. McPherson, his name was. And
Mm.
that here's one with it. Here's one a quote about it from the time that Edinburgh women wanted heroes who, unusually for any epoch, were chivalrous, affectionate, and monogamous. I don't know quite why that was tying in. But it does say that, yes, Macpherson's gain was Burns's loss. That the outrage at it all was enormous. Oh, there's a beautiful little bit as well I meant to bring up as well about his not warlike. Another outing we had in George Square. It's up on YouTube. So is that one as well. 3 gigs in one day. But under I Murder Hate, Burns's poem I Murder Hate, we put together with 2 Harold Pinter anti-war poems. And we did it below the statue as well. But his one, I think this sort of ties in with areas we've been discussing. I murder hate by field or flood, though glory's name may screen us. In wars at hame I'll shed my blood, life-giving wars of Venus. The deities that I adore are social peace and plenty. I'm better pleased to make one more than be the death o' 20. I thought that does tie in about the sense of the pendulum of power with these wars at home. Yeah. But so, yes, sorry, Chris, I'll try and find out a bit more, point it towards you, but I can't quite locate it right here and now.
I found the abstract of the Peter Gow paper that that Chris is talking about. So he did this keynote of Ossian and the End of Foolishness. And he talked about the Scottish Enlightenment and its contribution to anthropology. And he said the debate provoked by James Macpherson's publication of the mythic texts of Ossian during the Scottish Enlightenment was intense. Were these stories authentic? Dr. Johnson famously demanded to see the original manuscripts. Today, the debate seems ludicrous, for we have now formulated the idea of an oral tradition which has originality, but no obvious originals. So it's like we just had this huge shift in sensibility. But everything that you've been telling us or performing for us about Robert Burns is giving this sense of continuity from this oral culture coming into and bringing people, people's actual speech, their actual dialect, and these dialogues into poetry that was publishable and that merged with English in a way that became this quite novel literature. So yeah, the whole time is this complete transition between an oral to so whether it's James Macpherson or whether it's Robert Burns, it's both of those. But when we listened to Jacob on Shakespeare, he was also giving us the extent of the sheer weight of coinages that Shakespeare produced, that how much is still left in or was produced in English language from just this one voice. But again, what you're showing us for Robert Burns is how much of coinage has come down into, as you said, of mice and men, and so many others has come down into Burns' poetry. But I'm just thinking about Jacob's discussion of Shakespeare, that he had this kind of Janus face, two-face of facing to the rich and facing to the poor, which is kind of there in Robert Burns, but it's a bit more, the voices are in the poetry are kind of coming more from the people, the, as you say, Bahktinian speaking body, rather than being faced towards the very rich. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, he did certainly attempt and saw himself as using Augustan language as well, and that he, he identified with Shakespeare, and he was in that same way a trickster. There's so many different Burnses in a sense. I've probably not done justice to that really of that how many aspects that seem contradictory about him, that he, even just that in the way of the sort of the national bard, he saw himself, yes, as Scottish, but he also saw himself as British as well, and he wasn't just doing it as to try and cover his tracks or that as well. That he did have a light-footedness that he could have many different personas. Yeah.
We got some other comments or questions. Anyone?
Jacob, we want to see you.
I'm figuring it out. You'd think I'd figure out this by now. Yeah, Tam, thank you. It's so good to hear an artist in this forum that comes at it through experience of performance and embodying the stuff. In terms of Shakespeare, the attacks on Shakespeare, I think, are an attack on establishment.
Yeah.
Right, because Shakespeare, the writer, wasn't famous in his own time or her own time, whoever wrote these things, or their own time. If it was a group of people, it was 100 years after Shakespeare's time that Shakespeare became Shakespeare, and that was part of colonialism. And that's the attack, and attack it. What struck me with Burns is that he's doing something which Shakespeare did with class, but he's doing it with language in terms of the old Scots and bringing in English and putting them together in one poem. So there's something that's incommensurable in society that the artist is able to bring into reconciliation. And I'm working on Stephen Foster, my next gig, and this is the father of American music. So the first American sound came from this guy who took a banjo, which is an African instrument, and took Scots-Irish tunes because they were going out of memory. He reworked them and then brought stories from the American South, from slavery, and put them all together during this, a country going into civil war and going, this is how we all go together. And that it destroyed him. His artistry destroyed him, as it destroyed many of these poets. But the function of that, of going, what's incommensurable for the establishment or for the institution or for the Commonwealth, it takes these poets and these performers to embody everything working together. And I think Burns is phenomenal in that. My question for you also brings in the satire of the Three Estates and this constant rejection for almost 500 years now of English acknowledgement of Scottish literature and oral tradition. That in that space, just as Shakespeare's writing on the outskirts of London, outside the city walls, if you're not part of the legitimate structure, it gives you freedom to speak more truly and to activate carnival. And so I was wondering, as a performer, do you find more freedom in your performance and in your projects than your colleagues down in London? First of all, and second, are you concerned with how do I say this succinctly? Are you concerned with the appropriation of Carnival by the Boris Johnsons and the Trumps, who are playing the fool, but have no right to play the fool? And by stealing our mechanism, the people's mechanism, to take the piss out of those in power, they get us, who would be having a good time, taking them down a notch. They get us, by acting a fool with power, they get us to be serious. And suddenly we're in control, we're being controlled by ourselves. We're telling everybody, no, this isn't a joke. And so Carnival is completely taken out of our hands. This struggle with legitimacy, one, Scotland being outside of that, give and more freedom, but then seeing power structures take that behavior and that Carnival togetherness. Your thoughts?
Well, on that, actually, that it seems to be then that's what they've always done. They've always attempted to take Carnival and take those types of celebrations and convert them to their own ends, you know, Christmas and, you know, so many aspects of previous like pagan culture that they become absorbed and taken. That I think that those in power now have not just the sort of lack of legitimacy, but they have the credibility is so, you know, thin that they're not going to be able to take the people with them, or to deny what has been celebrations from below. Difficult with Burns in a way, in that what started up is that there was a mass desire to celebrate him and commemorate him, but it was already from the beginning, just in the same way with the statues, that there was an establishment basis to it, in that he was a Freemason. And he was a Freemason because he loved social life. It gave him opportunities to, but there's no reason to suppose he didn't believe in the rituals and the processes of Freemasonry. And it's a difficult area. That most of these statues of Robert Burns around the world are being put up by Masonic lodges. That one in Detroit, was they were involved in that. But Freemasonry at the time of Burns, apparently, I mean, because there's not a great deal of writing on it. It tends to get ignored a bit, or just too difficult to deal with. But apparently with George III, when George III put himself as head of the Freemasons, that's when it started to change. I mean, prior to that, Abraham Lincoln and so on, that the Freemasonry was, you know, part of radical movement. So that is one example of how there's always been these tussles as such to, so I cannot see them having the abilities to control Carnival, or to establish, or to, you know, promote any sort of form of Carnival and act the fool beyond fucking just mushing his hair up. So yeah, it's like it is with Donald Trump, that they're so lightweight in comparison with the more reactionary forces that have that from the past. So I don't know if that sort of answers a little bit, but it's interesting you say with in Satire of the Three Estates, because I was in the first production of that since the 1500s, since it was performed in Cooper, and then for Mary Queen of Scots, Mary Guise, that they had never had a full production of In Satyr of the Three Estates. It's Sir David Lindsay since. And it's online. It's something, Staging the Scottish Court is the sort of general website. And we did 3 performances of it, but it was brilliantly filmed, brilliantly professionally filmed, and it's all up there. And I played Divine Correction, sent by God to fucking lay down the law, and with a big pair of wings on. But Sir David Lindsay, an incredible figure, total European, a diplomat, being able to travel around, but again, having to be careful, I think, as well. He wasn't outside the establishment, he was part of it, but because his position, he was, and his influence and his strength there, he was able to get away with this. And it was a huge carnival, basically, that an outdoor theatre piece, that there's 3 characters are hung in it, and it is suggested that there was actual hangings were part of these carnival performances, that they did hang 3 people as part of the show, which we didn't do. But the amazing thing that happened with us is that we had a raven involved in the show that we let go. It was a trained raven that we knew we could get up and then it could come back again. And we had got it because the guy that was playing the king in it, he had been in a TV show called Raven, and so they'd got the raven through that. So this raven, they got up and it flew up, and then became aware in the trees. It was by Linlithgow Palace, Linlithgow Loch, outside. And these crows, big crows, came. They sat on the top of the trees looking at this. And then the next time we tried bringing the raven out, they like dive bombed it and scared the shit out of it. This acting raven, it was like a lovey, like I was, oh my God. And then this crow, honestly, started doing whoops and loop-de-loops, as if to say, you want fucking, a flying bird? I'll show you. And it was absolutely extraordinary. But I hoped that would become a yearly carnival, a festival of that play, perform it each year. There was a cast of about 40 of us in it, and it could be the sort of a learning ground for Scottish actors, coming through to learn their craft by performing that. And the Minister of Culture, as such, at the time, Fiona Hislop, she loved it, she saw it, and had high hopes. Very expensive to put on, obviously, but it didn't come to pass. That was it, really. But a hugely important play. And I did wonder, I was going to ask Jerry about that, whether Burns knew Lindsay, whether there'd been copies of that available that he would have read. But yeah. But I mean, yeah, the only other thing to say on that Shakespeare, that I thought it was interesting what I came across, that this idea of a bard, that this elevation, apparently the elevation of Shakespeare as a bard, which was put across as it's strange as a dramatist, he wasn't a poet, although of course he was a poet in many ways, but that this was as an antidote to Burns. It wasn't something that Shakespeare never called himself. He never wished himself to be a bard in the same way that Burns did. This was done by the literary establishment in England as an antidote to Burns, apparently.
Yeah, that what are you just telling about the hangings as part of the original performance, which was being reenacted by the crows with the raven. Um, that is of course totally Bahktinian, because there has to be deaths for a resurrection in the carnivals, and so the old hag must become the young, and everything must go all around. But I'm thinking about your how you're talking about Burns and emotion, and of course that isn't our association with Scots Puritan and Protestantism and Calvinism. And where does carnival fit into all that, and into Burns's emotion? But then of course Halloween under there would be, and Hogmanay as well, are all these turnings of the world at the gaps in time. So yeah, how does carnival and Scotland go together?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of misunderstandings really about the Calvinism, and like examples like John Knox, that the idea that they were completely anti theatre is not the case apparently at all. That it's been caricatured, and there was at Burns's time they would have these big festivals in Ayr in which local dignitaries, their houses would be attacked. Yeah, that there was an acceptance that this was, the idea that sort of Bakhtin seems to go against, of that it just being a safety valve. There was definitely ways that it was being operated. They were letting things happen in Ayr as definite safety valves. That surprised me a lot, that this did go on, but there is much stronger tradition than has been been put across in the sort of caricatures of Calvin and that. That it does get put across as if we're sort of very doer. So that whereas I think the fact the New Year and the way that was celebrated, and Beltane was a massive festival in Scotland as well. Going into May Day, and that got revived again as well, and it still happens in Edinburgh up Calton Hill. I've taken part in that as the blue man, head to toe, all blue, a little loincloth on, and I was like the May Queen's bouncer. I would sort of clear the path for the May Queen and the white women. They were all whited up, and then the red men. There was all of these sort of devil characters, and it was again sort of something that it has roots in the past, but has been something that's been created today, and probably past its peak now, because it has become a lot more ordered in ways that when I was doing it, I mean, there was like 15,000 people on top of this hill with self-security. There was no security as such. It was free and that as well, but people just worked it out. And there was, never any injuries or anything like that. And but there was a lot of drinking going on, and there was a lot of reveling going on. I remember I did it a couple of years, and one year I had an involvement with one of the white women, and I ended up more white than blue, and vice versa.
We're talking about body paint next week.
Yeah.
Have we got any more questions? Any more suggestions? If there's nobody else, I was going to ask you about Burns and the moon. Have we got any lunar poetry that you can think of?
Well, I tried to look particularly of the dark of the moon that him, but he loved the gloaming, particularly at that point. But I mean, there is quite a few where he talks about it's more about the fullness of the moon or the murk.
Yes.
There was a wonderful bit from when I talked about Edwin Morgan's that he was that it had a reference to the moon. Oh God, what else? Where is it now? I don't know quite whether I'll find it. But I mean, he looked on. He said, I mean, he loved those periods, that time at night, and he loved particularly storm times, that sort of storms at night. That's he would go out and be energized by that and feel that was the here's a verse from one of his songs that I absolutely love. This was an old, I think, Irish Gaelic tune called Una's Waterfall. That was the name of the tune as well. But the song's called Sae Flaxen Were Her Ringlets. But the final verse goes, let others love the city, and gaudy shoon at sunny noon. Gie me the lonely valley, the dew eve, the rising moon. Fair beaming and streaming, her silver light the boughs amang, whilst falling, recalling, the amorous thrush concludes his sang. That dearest chloris wilt thou rove by wimpling burn and leafy shaw, and hear my vows o' truth and love, and say thou lose me best o' all. There you go. That's a while. That's a while since I sung that. That's not really a bum clocks number. No. Can I go and watch the football then?
Yeah, it's football, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah. No, of course, yeah, and you're one man down. So
yeah.
Oh dear. Oh dear.
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity, and I've really, I've learned a lot from it, a lot more about Burns, but I know where I'm heading with it more. I mean, my ultimate would be to actually then go to Glasgow University and do anthropology, and then now I'm seeing, this would be the subject of the anthropology of Robert Burns. I could concentrate on that. I've just been asked very recently to start writing for a website on aspects of culture, and so I'm going to take what I've got here and I'm going to write a piece, and so I'll keep you posted on that. But I've learned a lot from it, and it's and I just really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to do it, because I can see in that same way there was a wonderful bit from Morna that I thought that's exactly how that ties in. The fact that you could invite me to do it, that you could see, this is potentially as part of what the areas that you're looking at, that it shows a sort of fluidity and a willingness to explore things in what you're doing that is wonderful. It's wonderful to me. It really is. So I'm very grateful for it.
Yeah, well, we're all absolutely thrilled to have got in touch with you, as with Jacob and so many people. This COVID thing hasn't been all bad, but somehow we've found each other in the most magical ways, and it's just absolutely stupendous for so many of us in RAG. We've really I don't know, been hugely energized by you and your politics, Tim. I mean, your history and your, I don't know, your it's just exactly what we've needed. So thank you so much. Camilla, do you want to say a little bit about next week? Camilla,
oh, okay.
do you want to say a little bit about next week?
Yeah. Just well, next week is me talking about beauty magic. Can you not hear me? Hello, can you not hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can now.
So it's me talking about beauty magic, the first art. So we're talking about the body again, because it's body art is the first art. So yeah, that's me next week, and we will have some pictures, because I don't think I can just say it all without pictures. But these lectures like Helga's and Tam's, which are just people being able to talk, are truly wonderful. But we need to have a few images next week. Okay.
I'll send you one of the pictures of me in my blue.
Yeah, that could be part of Camilla's talk. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, but that's part of it.
Okay,
if you and the lady have different colours, then you show the fact that you've been mixing it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody. Thanks, everybody. See you next week.
Thanks so much. Bye.
See you.